Okay, so I would like to just take some time now to talk about some of the key legislative implements associated with diversity, because these are really critical, and especially for us as leaders and managers, we need to have a pretty good understanding of the different legislation around diversity and inclusion. And the key ones are around the anti-discrimination legislation. So the Age Discrimination Act of 2004 makes it illegal for organizations and workplaces to discriminate someone based on their age. And that's up and down the scale. So you can't discriminate for someone for being too old for a particular job or someone's being too young for a particular job. I'm going to just come back. I'll come back to the second one. So I'll just go on to the third one. The Disability Discrimination Act of 1992 makes it illegal for organizations and workplaces to discriminate based on disability, both physical and mental disabilities. So you can't discriminate on someone because they are wheelchair bound, for example. The when if it is reasonable for you to make an adjustment for someone to accommodate for or make a reasonable adjustment to accommodate for a physical or non-physical disability, well then by law you are expected to make those accommodations. So that might be changing the height of something in the common tea room. It might be about making reasonable adjustments to workstations and so forth. It might be about uh, managing people's workloads to deal with some of the mental illnesses that occur and disabilities around that. The Racial Discrimination Act of 1975 makes it illegal to discriminate someone based on their race. So things such as because of my cultural heritage that I can't do this job anymore. So our my cultural heritage is of a particular part of the world that is not within Australia, and we have a client who doesn't want to deal with someone from my cultural heritage, so my organisation lets me go. Would be an example of a breach of the Racial Discrimination Act. The Sex Discrimination Act of 1984 makes it illegal to discriminate based on my sex or gender, and that can also include things such as pregnancy, so being looked over for a promotion because I'm currently, not that I am, but if I were, currently expecting. So if I'm say 6 months pregnant and I'm going for a promotion and I'm told or the decision has been made that I'm not going to get the promotion because I'm expecting to give birth in 3 months' time and potentially I could take maternity leave, then that would be a pretty clear cut case of based on the facts that I've just given, be a pretty clear cut case of sex discrimination, as one example. The Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission Act is really about based on this idea of we have basic human rights around expectations of having the same opportunity as others. So it ties into this equal opportunity. And the way that is probably easiest to think about the relationship between the equal opportunity legislation and the anti-discrimination legislation is that often the Anti-Discrimination Act is invoked if a case of discrimination has occurred in the workplace. So say, for example, like I said before, I've been looked over for a promotion because of my sex or because I'm expecting, then that would be probably a case for a sex discrimination to invoke the Sex Discrimination Act. In the Human Rights Equal Opportunity Act would be invoked more in the case of preemptive uh, um, as a preemptive tool for discrimination. So not necessarily where discrimination has occurred, but where the structures for discrimination exist. So an example of that would be if if I were to advertise a job in say Seek.com, and it would be something like an assistant required, only 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 people of a particular gender and of a particular age need apply. Now, that would be an example of a structural discrimination or an potential discrimination based on structural elements. So that would be more the case of where the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission Act would be invoked, more where there are systems, or the way that an organization makes decisions about promotions that stifle uh, uh, the opportunity for women to progress through an organization would be something that is more likely to be tackled through the Equal Opportunity Commission Act than it would be through the Sex Discrimination Act. The other discrimination one there that I'd like to just talk about as well is the Workplace Health and Safety Act of 2011. Now, that's a really important one because within the workplace legislation, workplace health and safety legislation, elements there for bullying and harassment, which often come in with some of the discrimination breaches as well. So you might have someone being constantly harassed and bullied in the workplace because of their age. Say because they might not be given opportunity because they're considered to be too young, or there might be constant comments being made about their age and their inability to engage with technology, and that pattern of behavior would probably be looked through the prism of workplace bullying, harassment, as well as potential discrimination. So a lot of these legislative implements do have a symbiotic relationship with each other. But that's some of the significant legislative tools. And of course, to get more information on these, the best place to go is right to the horse's mouth, which is the legislation.gov.au website, where you will find these copies of these acts, but you will also see whether they're the most current, because obviously these are constantly reviewed and updated. And the website, if you haven't been, I would recommend go have a look at it, get familiar with it. It's a terrific website to navigate through. It's great to get in there, and if you haven't had the opportunity to look through legislation, spend some time in there, pull up one of these implements, have a look at how that legislation is formed. I don't want to get too much into the way that legislation is passed through Parliament or created, but the what you see with the Act is the final implement that governs our laws. So get familiar with that, have a look through it, and familiar with how they're written and the content within them. The other thing I just want to talk about quickly around legislation, and it's something that I've talked in other units, but bringing it back to this idea of culture. So of course, and I talked about this in the innovative unit when I was talking about an innovative workplace culture. I want to also just bring these ideas back to diversity and inclusion. So culture is driven by our behaviors, our pattern of behaviors, as I said in that other unit, the innovation unit, and those patterns of behaviors are driven by our values, the things that we deem to be important. So things like policy, which I'm going to talk about shortly, are one of the tools that we use to promote the importance of diversity and inclusion. The way that we act as managers, our role modeling, what we say, what we do, that also promotes our values and creates an example of behaviors. So policies will drive procedures. Procedures will set out behaviors. The way that we act as leaders and managers drive behaviors as well. And all this promotes a culture. And what we want to do is promote a culture that is inclusive, a culture that promotes diversity and inclusion. And this all ties in with the legislative implement. So being aware of the legislation, having policies and procedures in place that promote the legislation and foster those values embedded within that. having those frameworks, making sure that all people across the organization, from us as leaders and managers to very new employees, understand what those behaviors are and act consistently in the way that those behaviors need to be demonstrated to support our values, and that drives our culture.